In the war between Ukraine and Russia, swords are coming out of their scabbards as temperatures rise. Tensions on the southern Ukrainian front lines are at their peak again as the clashes flare up. Described as the most strategic center of the war, the Crimean peninsula has been at the center of clashes for a long time. Crimea is now the primary target of the Ukrainian armed forces for the checkmate move of the chess strategy reconstructed by Kiev. Therefore, critical moves such as explosions, mysterious attacks of unknown origin, and drone attacks on the peninsula began again. Most recently, we witnessed another striking series of drone attacks on the Crimean peninsula in the last week. Airstrikes were carried out 3 times on the port of Sevastopol and near the Kerch Bridge. The attack target was the Russian oil depots and the naval headquarters of the Russian Black Sea Fleet in Sevastopol. All these attacks were perhaps one of the most violent events since the beginning of the war. Simultaneously with the attacks, unidentified drones carried out 2 airstrikes on Moscow, the capital of Russia. In addition, explosions occurred in fuel tanks, ports, and military airports in at least 10 regions in many cities of Russia. These attacks were touted as a flare of Ukraine's upcoming major offensive. The most striking of these attacks was the huge explosions in the Crimea. An oil tank in the Cossack Bay in Sevastopol, the target of the first attack in Crimea, turned into a blazing inferno. The second airstrike worried the Kremlin even more. The target of the second airstrike was the port of Taman, near the strategically important Kerch Strait bridge connecting Russia with Crimea. The huge oil depot in Taman port burned with wild flames early yesterday morning. Regarding the first attack in the Cossack Bay in Sevastopol, the Ukrainian Military Secret Service claims that 10 oil tanks with a capacity of 40,000 tons were rendered unusable in the attack. This figure is a very serious loss for Russia. The Kiev administration did not take responsibility for this attack, but in the statement made by the Military Secret Service, it was stated that similar explosions will continue on the peninsula from now on. On the other hand, Ukrainian Southern Operational Command spokesperson Natalia Humenyuk stated that after the explosions in the city of Sevastopol in the Russian-occupied Crimea, Russian warships were afraid to enter Sevastopol. It is stated that Russian warships have been stopping at Novorossiysk port more often than Sevastopol for resupply in recent days. Ship groups currently consist of 10 ships and they are maneuvering in the area they think is safe for now. Closer to the southeast coast of the Crimea in the Black Sea, as dispersed as possible are the armed drone attacks of the Ukrainian army against the Crimea, a harbinger of the Great Offensive. Let's take a look at the details of the major attacks in Crimea and the signs of a major offensive by Ukraine. In the attack in the Cossack Bay, the pro-Russian Sevastopol governor of Crimea, Mikhail Roswell-Hadjiyev, reported that a large oil storage facility was hit by a drone. Tanks caught fire after a suspected drone attack hit a fuel tank in the port city of Sevastopol, causing an explosion. We can say that the large flames that emerged after the explosion revealed the magnitude of the event, stating that a fire broke out in the facility as a result of the attack. Roswell-Ishayev stated that 4 tanks were damaged. Governor Roswell-Ishayev has not yet given clear information about injuries during the fire, which is currently managed by local firefighters and emergency services. In fact, Roswell-Ishayev added that due to the significant amount of fuel, it may take some time to completely control the fire due to the large volume of fuel. It was a concern that no conclusion could be drawn about the extent of the fire and damage. When the studies on the incident are completed, the picture that will emerge will be put as a target in front of the Russian people by Russian President Vladimir Putin himself. Russian leader Putin, who ordered that all the details of the explosion be presented, is very angry. While the Ukrainian authorities did not directly take responsibility for these attacks, they stated that they have the right to hit any target in response to Russia's aggression. It is stated that civilian structures other than the fuel tank were not damaged in the attack. The massive drone attack near the Kerch Bridge took place a few days after the explosion in Cossack Bay. It turned out that a Russian oil depot located near the tragically important Kerch Strait Bridge, which connects Russia with Crimea, burned down in the early hours of the past few days. Veniamin Kondratiev, the governor of the Krasnodar region in the south of Russia, reported the striking news in a statement on the Telegram channel. Veniamin Kondratiev stated that an oil storage tank caught fire in the village of Volna, near the port of Taman, and the fire was classified as the highest degree of difficulty. Volna is Russia's only land link with the illegally annexed peninsula of Crimea. Also, this city is located near the Kerch Strait Bridge, which is an important supply route for Russian forces in the midst of the ongoing war in Ukraine. Therefore, this situation may disrupt the connection and logistics of Crimea and Ukraine for Russia. On the other hand, Russia's state news agency TASS reported that the fire was caused by a drone crash. Videos of the fire spread rapidly on Russian and Ukrainian social media, showing a large flame and huge black smoke rising into the sky. Local news channel CHP Sevastopol stated in Telegram that the fire was seen from the Kerch Strait Bridge. Anton Gerashchenko, one of the advisors to the Minister of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, announced that 5 fire engines were working to put out the fire. According to Gerashchenko's statements, the size of the fire was seriously large. On the other hand, Gerashchenko suggested that the fire could be part of Ukraine's preparations for the upcoming offensive. But for now, Ukrainian authorities have not claimed responsibility for the fire. Weakening the enemy's logistics is an essential part of preparations for counterattack operations. Maybe Gerashchenko is right, and the Ukrainian forces are now targeting Volna for finishing moves. As we can see, the intensity of attacks on oil depots and logistics is increasing. There is a resource weakening of the Russian armed forces at this point. Ukraine continues to receive the support of the West to take its offensive plans to a much higher level. The Ukrainian armed forces aims to recapture the lands occupied by Russia with the counterattack, which will be organized with the support of weapons from the West. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg announced that in addition to more than 1,550 armored vehicles, 230 tanks and other equipment, Ukraine's allies have sent large quantities of ammunition, as well as training and equipping more than 9 new Ukrainian brigades. This will put Ukraine in a strong position by continuing to retake the occupied territories, Stoltenberg told reporters in Brussels. In addition, Stoltenberg stated that 31 NATO allies are determined to support the Ukrainian army, adding that retaking the territory occupied by Kremlin forces would give Kiev a stronger negotiating position if peace talks take place. In addition, NATO countries put their navies on high alert after the sabotage plan of Putin's ships was detected. The Swedish and Finnish navies have expressed concern about potential Russian sabotage of power grids after a Russian spy ship was spotted. The observation of Russian warships near submarine cables and wind farms in the Baltic has put the Swedish and Finnish navies on high alert. According to reports in the Finnish media, Swedish Navy Commander Juha Skog Haslam warned of possible sabotage against the power grids of Russia's NATO allies in the region. On the other hand, we can say that it's a matter of curiosity how successful Putin's steps on how to defend against the big Ukrainian offensive that is approaching step by step. But Russia has lost a significant amount of power, and it's predicted that soon the Ukrainian army will seize the advantage, as in the areas previously liberated from Russian occupation in Kiev, Kharkiv, Balaklia, and Kupiansk. It is not clear exactly when this will happen, but Ukraine seems to be the winner in the end of this war. The reason for this is Russia's record military losses as a result. Putin will have to give up his stubbornness and put an end to this madness. If Russia does not want to go back to the old Soviet times. Russia's attacks on Ukraine have been going on for more than a year. This spring, conflicts between the two countries are expected to intensify. While both countries were explaining their preparations, hundreds of kilometers of defense line of Russia in the south of Ukraine was viewed from the satellite. Experts are of the opinion that this line of anti-tank trenches, minesweepers, and trenches will take the conflict in Ukraine to a new dimension. Ukraine has announced that it has almost completed its preparations for a counterattack on Russia in the spring. This attack, which will probably be launched in the south of the country, will have a very important place in this war. In addition, satellite images shared by the U.S. satellite company Maxar revealed the dimensions of the Russian defense is being built in parts of southern Ukraine. Satellite photographs showed layers of anti-tank ditches, obstacles, minefields, and trenches. However, the defensive line of Russian troops continues for hundreds of kilometers on the rugged southern front, where Ukrainian forces are expected to intensify their counterattack in the coming weeks. Applied footage also showed wide trenches and thousands of defensive positions east of the town of Polihi in the Zaporizhia region. Ukraine is making progress in key areas as Russia goes on the defensive on the southern front line. Let's take a closer look at the developments on the southern front. Geographical data and reports released by Russian military bloggers show that Ukrainian forces are positioned on the east bank of the river. The U.S. Institute for War Studies said in a statement, but the scale and objectives of these first recorded Ukrainian successes were unclear. According to the US-based think tank, Russian military forces withdrew from the regional capital, also called Kherson, and from the west bank of the Dnipro during a Ukrainian offensive last year. Natalia Humeniuk, spokesperson for Ukraine's Southern Command, neither confirmed nor denied the progress report on the river bank, told Ukrainian television. Natalia Humeniuk referred to the reported river crossing. Humeniuk stated that in response to such information, the Russians significantly intensified their attacks on the opposite shore. The official reported that civilians were injured and about 30 buildings were destroyed, including a school. In addition, the spokesperson called for informational silence to ensure operational safety. Humeniuk said, for example, "I want everyone to understand that it is a very difficult task to overcome an obstacle like the Dnipro. When the front line is moving along such a wide and powerful river, for months, Dnipro has marked the line of contact in the Kherson region, where it's regularly bombarded by Russian forces stationed on the other side of the river." Ukrainian forces established a foothold near the town of Oleshki, along the Dnipro River Delta from Kherson. The War Research Institute announced that Kiev troops were approaching the nearby village of Dapki. The think tank cited data from Russian military bloggers for this assessment. The head of the Kherson district established by the Kremlin denied that Ukrainian forces had established a foothold on the east bank of the river. Analysts believe that if Ukraine continues its counteroffensive, it is to cross the land corridor that Russia managed to seize at the beginning of the war between its territory and the Crimean peninsula. Such an operation would require crossing the Dnipro River. Ukrainian forces have been operating on the east bank of the river for weeks, according to military bloggers cited by the ICW. Kiev forces established stable supply lines west of the Antonivsky Bridge. According to the Russian forces control an area of 1.5 kilometers behind. The bridge is claimed that the rest of the bridge was under the control of Ukrainian forces. Antonivsky Bridge plays a key role in the Kherson region. There have been significant developments on this bridge since last year when Ukraine began its counterattack in the south. It began by targeting the bridge as part of a wider effort to isolate Russian forces west of the Dnipro River. When Western long-range weapons systems arrived en masse, Ukraine hit Russian ammunition depots and command and control centers behind the front lines, weakening Russia's dominance in the region. Antonivsky Bridge is the main crossing over the Dnipro River in the Kherson region. For example, last May, Ukrainian troops struck the strategic Antonivsky Bridge, which Moscow needed to supply its forces occupying the south of the country. Ukrainian forces had used US-supplied HIMARS multiple rocket launchers to hit the bridge after the HIMARS attack. The deck of the bridge was pierced with holes preventing the passage of vehicles. In November, the Antonivsky Bridge was blown up before dawn, after most of the Russian forces had withdrawn and just before the Ukrainian forces entered the city. The days are very active on the southern front line of Ukraine. Ukrainians who are trying to advance to Crimea by crossing the Dnipro River are also taking precautions in attacks against Crimea. The Ukrainian armed forces deployed a long-range missile system Grom-2 in Zaporizhia for attacks on Crimea. The Grom-2 missile system has a range of up to 300 kilometers, which allows the Ukrainian army to attack the territory of Crimea. Vladimir Rogov, head of the Zaporizhia movement We Are With Russia, announced that the Grom-2 long-range operational tactical missile system was transferred by Ukrainian troops to the city of Zaporizhia under the control of Kiev. RIA Novosti reported that, according to Rogov, this missile system could be used for attacks in Crimea. Rogov argues that these actions confirm the need to push the Ukrainian troops as far as possible from the Zaporizhia region, and the line of contact should be moved deeper into Ukraine. Earlier, Vladimir Rogov also reported that Ukrainian troops accumulated military equipment in metallurgical factories and granaries in the Orakel and Porkovsky districts of the Zaporizhia region under the control of Ukrainian forces. In another development, Russia's secret plans for the Baltic states came to light. According to an investigation, the Kremlin has drawn up a series of plans outlining how it could exert its influence in the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania in the coming years. Leaked documents from Russian President Vladimir Putin's administration in Moscow were seized by Swedish news sources prior to Putin's full-blown invasion of Ukraine. The Baltic states had warned for years of a war Russia could launch. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov called Poland and 3 EU member states representatives of extremism in Europe in January. The strategies were created by the Directorate for Cross-Border Cooperation of the Presidential Administration of Russia. This agency had previously prepared another document revealing that the Kremlin plans to incorporate Belarus into a union state with Russia by 2030. The documents state that associations and organizations that can covertly advance pro-Russian narratives and spread Russian culture should be created. Propaganda should claim discrimination against Russian speakers, and Russian-speaking students should be invited to Russia. Meanwhile, the demolition or relocation of Soviet-era World War II monuments must be prevented, according to Swedish news sources. About 300,000 ethnic Russians live in Estonia. They make up about 24% of the population. About 471,000 ethnic Russians live in Latvia, about 25% of its population. And Lithuania is home to about 140,000, representing 5% of its population. According to a joint investigation by news sources, the key issue for the Kremlin is to reduce the presence of the NATO military alliance in the former Soviet countries, while at the same time strengthening Russian influence and culture. A strategy paper points to the risk that Russia's Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania will be disconnected from Russia's electricity grid. The document suggests that the Baltic states plan to use their dependence on the electricity grid as a lever. The Baltic states are part of an electrical grid controlled by Moscow. However, countries are preparing to synchronize their systems with continental Europe at the beginning of 2026. A Lithuanian document states that the increased NATO military presence in the region will create conditions under which Russia will be forced to accept the potential damage it can do to its national security. The document states that the number and scope of NATO's operational and combat training activities in the country should be reduced while preventing Lithuania from acquiring NATO-linked air defense. In summary, the Kherson and Dnipro rivers will always be in the foreground in the Ukrainian war. A success here will play a role in bringing the Kiev leader to his dream of Crimea. We will have to wait and see how Russia will respond to the Ukrainian counterattack. War is the greatest tragedy. A person who participates in a war is never the same again. To kill a human being, To feel the danger of death intensely and to live in great fear every day can completely destroy a person's psychology. All reports on the Second World War speak of the deaths of 25 million soldiers. But the soldiers who did not die in the war were not spared. Many of these soldiers struggled with severe psychological problems for the rest of their lives. Russia is going through a similar process. Today's news in the Russian press has revealed just how terrible the situation has become. The Russian army has 1 million active members and 2 million reservists. It is known that hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers fought in the invasion of Ukraine. Putin sent 300,000 more to the battlefield after the mobilization decision he announced. According to the data announced by the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, more than 130,000 soldiers have died in the Russian army in total. The number of wounded soldiers is not yet known exactly. Some soldiers could not withstand the conditions of war. Thousands of Russian soldiers who suffered psychological crisis after participating in the war were sent home. No treatment program was provided for these soldiers because for the Russian government, the health of soldiers and citizens is not important. Russian government only wants to win this war. Mikhail Lyubimov, a 25-year-old soldier, was one of the Russian soldiers deployed for the invasion in Ukraine. Lyubimov did not want to participate in this war at all, but his commanders forced him to go to the front. The young soldier got a big shot during the fighting. After the attacks of the Russian army, Ukrainian soldiers carried out counter-operations. In this operation, many of Lyubimov's friends died in front of his eyes. Bullets passed by the young soldier. Seeing these moments, Lyubimov had a panic attack due to the fear he experienced and then fainted, unable to speak for a long time after the battle and hallucinating. The soldier continued to be deployed to the front, but Lyubimov was often hallucinating and scared. One day, on guard duty, he thought Ukrainian soldiers were operating on a Russian base and opened fire. But there were other Russian soldiers on guard duty where he opened fire. After this incident within the army, the commanders decided to send Lyubimov home. When the young soldier returned home, he continued to hallucinate frequently. He woke up scared every night and hardly spoke to anyone. His family was very worried about the situation. They contacted the Russian authorities for psychological support, but received no response. Lyubimov said he was afraid of being conscripted back into the army. According to his mother, he had nightmares every night and would scream in his sleep. "I don't want to fight." Lyubimov was also very angry with Putin. He blamed Putin for the deaths of his friends in the army. He said Putin was a murderer. Natalia Lyubimov, the young soldier's mother, woke up in the morning, her home in the Zareknaya neighborhood in southern Moscow, to a huge shock. Waking up in her 10th floor apartment, she was glad to think that her son had not woken up screaming. This morning, she prepared a nice breakfast for him and went into his room to wake him up. But her son was not in bed. Seeing that the window was open, the mother, Natalia Lyubimov, approached the window with great fear. She looked down and saw the lifeless body of her son in the backyard of their house. The young soldier committed suicide, unable to bear the tragedies of war. His mother immediately called an ambulance, but nothing could bring the young soldier back to life. Another 25-year-old has died as a result of Putin's aggressive policies. Lyubimov is just one of at least 5 Russian soldiers who have apparently committed suicide in recent weeks. Russian soldiers are unable to cope with the trauma of this war. This is driving the families of Russian soldiers crazy. Lyubimov's mother blames Putin for her son's death. Putin is causing the deaths of thousands of people, both in Ukraine and in Russia. The families of Russian soldiers are furious. Anti-war demonstrations in Moscow have become even more heated after these events. The families of the soldiers joined these protests and made statements against Putin. One soldier's mother said, "I don't know why my son is in Ukraine. I can't reach him. I'm not sure if he is alive. I want him to surrender to the Ukrainian army or escape from the army, but I don't know any way to tell him." Maybe somehow, he will watch this interview. I don't want anyone to die for Putin, not just my son. No one should die for the political ambitions of a 70-year-old monster. After these words, the protesters in the Red Square started a huge applause. Families of Russian soldiers call on Putin to resign. Putin's government is suffering a huge loss of face in the face of the revolts of soldiers' families. Putin is helpless in the face of these revolts. A few months ago, Putin said that he would meet with the soldiers' mothers and listen to their demands. A program was then organized and it was claimed that Putin met with the mothers of soldiers. However, it was soon revealed that this organization was completely fake. It turned out that the women who attended the meeting with Putin were actually intelligence agents. Putin, who could not find the courage to face the soldiers' mothers, preferred to meet with his own agents instead. The Russian press wanted to interview the mothers who attended this meeting, but they could not reach any of them. So some reporters started to investigate these women. As a result of the research, it was seen that these women had actually been with Putin many times before in different roles. One of the women had previously been around Putin in many different roles, such as an ice cream seller, a soldier, and a cleaning lady. After this fact was revealed, the anger of the Russian people grew even more. Putin is constantly lying to his own people. Russian citizens no longer trust Putin. The revolt of soldiers' families has become the biggest agenda of Russia. It is curious what Putin will do as a result of these revolts. Putin is afraid of harsher police interventions against these protests because the families of the soldiers have great support from the Russian people. If the police use violence against the soldiers' families, there could be a much bigger uprising in Russia. Soldiers' mothers have become Putin's biggest fear. The revolt of the mothers is changing the course of the war. Russian soldiers are also following the developments in these uprisings. Russian soldiers who cannot communicate with their mothers are trying to see their families in the news of these rebellions. It is known that these uprisings affect the soldiers in the Russian army very much. It is claimed that many of the Russian soldiers who followed the statements of the mothers surrendered to the Ukrainian army. The Ukrainian government has announced that the surrendered Russian soldiers will be reunited with their families. The Ukrainian army first gives warm food and winter clothes to the surrendered Russian soldiers. The soldiers are then reunited with their families via video phone calls. Russian soldiers' mothers are waiting for a phone call at any moment to meet their sons. What do you think about the revolt of soldiers' mothers in Russia? Do you think the revolt of soldiers' mothers will affect the course of the war? What do you expect Putin to do about it? How do you think it affects Russian soldiers? What do you think about Russian soldiers traumatized by the war? So what do you guys think about this issue? Please express your thoughts in the comments. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications in order to be informed about new videos. Thank you for watching us.